So now that we've got our preliminary blade done, now what you want to do is take your clay. You don't need a whole lot for this. And you want to roll it out really thin. I rolled this out on my pasta machine. This is the second to smallest setting. So on mine, the thinnest setting is a 9. This is an 8. I would say this is maybe 1 or 2 cards thick. Okay, so you need a sheet of that, and it just needs to be longer than your blade, or at least as long as the blade. And then just have some extra clay left over for everything else. You see, this is just like a little ball. That's all you need. You won't need very much. And pretty much everything we're going to be doing is going to be with this sheet. So you can have a little extra clay to the side just in case. But for the most part, this will be all we need. So we're going to start building our blade now. So I'm going to take my liquid clay and we're going to just put a thin layer, not too much, spread it around. Don't get it too thick, because if you put too much on there when you put the actual clay on, it will soften your clay up too much, or it'll just want to slide around. You just want enough to coat your tape. There we go. Just enough to coat it so that your clay will stick more easily to it. So I just coated the one side, and I'm just gonna lay it down on here. If you want to, just like before, you can pre-cut this to the correct width and then just line it up and do it. I just think it's a little easier just to leave it big like this and press it on. Okay. Just make sure you don't leave anything exposed. And make sure when you put the clay on, it doesn't go down onto your bare wire. You only want that up here on your foil. So now you can either use your X-Acto, or if you've got the tissue blade, which is what this is really good for. Okay. You can see it's sticking to the foil a little, a lot. I really don't like this clay. Okay. If it comes off, just line it back up and re-stick it. No big deal. There we go. Okay, and then you just want to trim your point. I'm gonna use the X-Acto for that. But you can still do it with the tissue blade. Just make sure you don't cut through your tape. Okay, so when you look at it, especially if yours came off like mine, you'll see it may not be perfectly straight. Might be a little wiggly. That's fine, because you can just trim it, which is what I'm going to do. Tissue blade here. That looks a lot better. Alright, like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect yet, because we still have to get the other side on. Okay, so we're going to do pretty much the same like we did before with the tape. Let me get this blade out the way. And the other blade out the way before I have a disaster. Point. Okay. And I'm just going to take the same thing, coat the other side, gonna put a little bit more on this time so it doesn't want to come off on me. It fairly coated, and just make sure you get some on the wire up here too, because when you rub it, sometimes it has a tendency to just want to go on one side or the other, and you don't want there to be any air pockets where it's not sticking to the wire section. So, and just to let you know ahead of time, this point, since there's no wire in it, is going to want to wiggle everywhere. So you're going to have to keep an eye on it to make sure it stays straight, especially before you bake it. You're going to want to check to make sure everything is aligned. Okay, so just like last time, you can either pre-cut it, or you can just do what I'm going to do, shortcut it, and just lay it on top. Give it a good press. Not enough to squish this side, but enough to hopefully get it to stick. I'm just gonna peel up the whole thing so I can put it down here on the Teflon like last time. And make sure the point is straight. Might be a little hard to see it, but now I'm gonna take my tissue blade, and what I'm gonna do to try to keep it as even as possible, well, one thing too, make sure you have a straight tissue blade. Could have mentioned that before, but and try not to bend it while you're moving. I mean, this is a rigid blade, but it still is bendy enough, so just kind of, you can just kind of put it down and slide it in when you cut it. That way you can make sure it's lined up before you press down, and it'll help make sure you get it all. Press, 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 and peel. Come on, release, you darn clay. Okay. It'll take some doing because it's going to want to stick to your fingers instead of to itself. And just gently kind of pinch it along the edge. Don't do it too hard, otherwise you'll end up making your sword a little wider and you'll thin your clay out too much. Just enough to get the two pieces to kind of want to stick together. If you're lucky, that will happen when you cut it. And you could also probably put something on your blade that will keep it from sticking to the clay. I just don't bother. So I usually don't have this problem. This is just so sticky. But anyway, it's kind of worth fighting with it for the flexibility. So at least I know once it's done, it won't break. Okay. And just get it pretty well stuck on. And then you can do the same like before. Get your X-Acto blade, and I'm gonna turn it this way so I can see it a little bit better. Trim your blade at the tip. And that's what we got. And you want to do the same thing on this side, just kind of gently pinch it together so that you can't see that foil anymore. You should just be able to see that parting line. If you still see foil tape, it needs to be pinched shut a little bit more. And if you accidentally cut it a little too small, you can just kind of pinch and it will stretch the clay over to cover it. Okay. Right there, I pinched it too hard. If that happens, it's gonna distort things, but what you gonna do? You just gotta push it back into place. And you can do this too, where you kind of gently pull the clay over the edge of it, and then you got to flip it back around, and then you go back the other direction. Do it gently, otherwise you'll end up widening your blade. If you don't mind doing that, that's fine. But just do it fairly gently. And then actually too, when you do that, you'll start to see exactly the line where your wire's in there, which will help you form your blade. Okay. And if at any point it looks like it's starting to grow, then you just kind of pull it back towards the center. If you pulled it in too much, you might be able to see a little dent. Pull it back out. It's fairly easy to do. If you want your sword to be a little bit wider at the bottom, you can also do that now just by pinching it out a little bit and just running your thumb from your wire in the center out towards the edge. And that's one way to do that. You can also do it from the beginning if you want to do it at the tape stage. You can cut your tape like that. Okay, so at this point, all you want to do is make sure that your edges are shut and that you don't see a seam line anymore, and just keep it straight. The blade is probably going to be a little lumpy from you messing with it before, trying to get those edges shut. So you can just rub your nail across it, and that'll help smooth things out. Or you can use a tool and do the same thing. And it'll also help define the center point where your wire is. And just don't forget to do it on both sides. Okay. And you can see that line in there, I think, a little bit better. See, the light kind of catches it. And it defines it a little bit more. Okay, then you just flip it, which now your other side looks like junk. But you just do the same thing. You can either use your fingernail, or you can just run a tool across it. And this one's not even, it's got like a slight curve to it. Turn it, see it? It also has a flat side, but I'm using the curved side. So it still does the same thing. This will also help smooth out fingerprints, but you don't really have to worry about if you get fingerprints in it, because if you do, that can always be sanded out later, or any lumps and bumps. I would still say try to get it as smooth as possible now, rather than trying to sand everything out. And that's pretty much all it is at this point. Once you get everything blended in together and the two sides are stuck. Oh, here's a good thing to show you. I got an air bubble. Remember I was talking about air bubbles? Here's one right here. You can tell if you have an air bubble because you'll poke it and you'll see it kind of push around. See, I don't know if you can tell, it looks really mushy. And move it up a little bit. And you push it, and it just kind of scoots over. If that happens, take your craft knife, put a little slice in that area. And that's why I was saying about not having enough liquid clay on that wire section, because it's going to want to make air pockets. And so you just slice it a little bit, and then you just gently squeeze the air out. And if you still have it, it could be because your clay just got baggy from being stretched, and it's just not sticking as well in that spot anymore. Just slice it again and until it's gone. Once you see that it's gone, then you're good. You don't want to bake it with an air bubble, because that air bubble can actually, especially since it's a real flexible clay like Cos clay, sometimes that air bubble will just kind of expand and you'll end up with a lump on the surface. Or sometimes it'll if the clay's thin, like we have it, it can get to the surface and just kind of rupture through. And then you'll have a mark, which sometimes you can sand out and sometimes you can't. So, pushing a lot harder. That's why it's mushing all around. But like I said, you don't have to worry about that because it's probably going to happen. And see, now it looks crazy. Unless you like how the crazy shape turned out, because it's looking like that now. All you have to do is sit it back down and carefully trim off whatever is excess. Or if you like the shape, then go with it. And basically you just want to keep messing with it and smooth it as much as possible. Try to keep the shape as much as possible. If you need to, besides trimming off any that kind of grew to the side, you can actually take this and shave it down a little. Like if you really want it to have that bevel, you can do that just by, you know, kind of rubbing from the center towards the edge. But you can also do that by just kind of gently slicing a little bit off. Depends on what your knife control is. If you can do that and only shave off just little thin areas just at the edges, then you can do that. Otherwise, just try to do it like this. And just don't forget, you need to smooth both sides. And it's better to kind of try to turn it and work on each side kind of at the same time, because otherwise you'll spend all of your time getting one side good, and then you still have to mess with the other side, which will wrinkle this side. It's the one downside to making a sword this way, since it's just tape underneath. It will be a little wiggly. And if you got like little crumbs, you can just like take a paintbrush and wipe them away. You can also use a paintbrush to smooth your clay out. It can actually help to keep you from pushing on it too hard. And it works pretty well. But like I said, just try to get it as good as you can get it. It doesn't need to be perfect, because once it's baked, I'm gonna sand it a little bit. And if you've got any major dips or dents or anything like that, you can always add another layer of clay. And that's a lot easier to do after you've got a layer baked already. And one thing with cosplay, even after it's baked, even though it's really impact resistant, it cuts really easy, so you're gonna need to keep that in mind. It's a good thing if you want to make adjustments after something's already baked, because you can cut right through it. And it doesn't, when you cut it, it doesn't kind of shatter. So you could actually even just cut it with scissors afterwards. You don't have to worry about it shattering and, you know, pieces flying off in every direction. Even though this is still pretty ugly, it's actually pretty close. It is smooth enough that it can be sanded. And also, I don't think I'm gonna really be able to get it any smoother than this because it's not sticking as well to the tape for some reason. I didn't have this problem when I did the other one. So I'm probably gonna have to experiment with that a little bit more to see exactly what the problem was. Did I use too much or did I use too little? And I'm thinking it's the side where I used only a little, and I think it's just too many spots that wherever it wasn't, the clay isn't staying stuck to it, and it's getting those little baggy pockets, like where we had the air bubble. And I think that's more of the issue. Because the one side is fine, it's not coming up, and the other side keeps having areas where it seems like it wants to dislodge. So I think that's kind of the reason. But anyway, so just get good enough. Doesn't have to be perfect, because you can come in with another layer, which is another reason why we make it so thin. Is this way anything that needs filling can be filled. Because there's a few spots on here where my foil is exposed, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. Just need something on there. You can try to get it as good as you can, but it won't be perfect. This was a lumpy mess, just to let you know. You see it's pretty smooth now once all the sanding is done. This would have been much easier with a different clay, but I would rather it be a little bit more flexible, so I go ahead and fight with this. I am actually going to pretty much leave it like this. I'm going to even that out because that would be all these little lumps over here, because that would just be too much sanding. Like if you got like major lumps like that, I would say just go ahead and slice them off. Okay, so if you can get it to roughly a short, roughly a sword shape, and get the clay on there relatively in the shape you wanted and some semblance of smooth. Even up here where you got your point, even if your point looks a hot mess, that's okay too, because you'll be able to sand that back into shape too. Because remember, this one was just as ugly as this. And it turned out fine. So don't agonize too much. And really, I probably could have sanded this one more than I did, because by the time I got to the stage where I painted it, there were still some lumps and bumps. But I think it still turned out pretty good. Okay. It's ugly, but it's done. This is pretty much where I'm going to leave it. You can see the foil is exposed in several areas. Well, I can see. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can. So, like up in here, you can see that ultra shiny spot. That's the foil. This side's not so bad. Like I was saying, the one side actually is sticking and the other one is not. That's why I'm having such an issue, is this side doesn't want to stick. This side doesn't want to stick. And so pretty much every time I touch it, it's loosening itself in certain spots and then stretching. And that's why I keep getting, it keeps going out of shape. It's sticking good down here. It's just up here. I didn't make sure there was enough liquid clay on it. So at least now you know if you don't put enough on there, you're going to go through this problem because it's not going to want to stay stuck. Whereas this side, if you remember, I put a good amount on there, so it's staying where I put it. But every time I mess with the other side, it lumps this side back up. But that's how it goes. Alright, so like I said, this is pretty much ready for baking, as ugly as it is. This is ready for baking. We're gonna bake this at, you know, whatever the suggested temperature and timing is for your clay. Actually, if you don't want to bake it now, you don't have to. I'm actually going to leave mine raw for the time being. I usually will just do that, and then I'll bake everything all at the same time. It just saves time, that way I don't have to wait for it to bake again, but that's up to you. You can bake it now if you don't want to risk making it uglier than it already is. Or if you would just rather do everything at once, then you can go ahead and wait until after we have everything completely done. And that way you could just get everything done in a single bake. It's really up to you. Doesn't matter one way or the other. Don't panic though if your sword is really lumpy. I am going to show you how to fix that. It's not going to stay this way. It is supposed to be pretty ugly at this point. But after we finish the next step, I'll show you how to take it from this lumpiness to this.